The bitter winds of December 17, 7-6 howled across the frozen Delaware River, carrying with them the dying hopes of a fledgling nation. General George Washington stood on the Pennsylvania shore, his weathered face etched with the weight of command and the specter of defeat. Behind him, the remnants of the Continental Army huddled around meager fires, their feet wrapped in bloody rags, their spirits as frozen as the ground beneath them. The American cause had never seemed more desperate. After a string of devastating defeats in New York, Washington's army had been reduced from 20,000 men to fewer than 3,000 effective soldiers. The British forces under General William Howe controlled Manhattan, and their Hessian allies had established winter quarters in Trenton, just across the icy Delaware. Many Continental soldiers' enlistments would expire at midnight on December 31st, threatening to dissolve what remained of America's fighting force. In the candlelit confines of his headquarters at McConkey's Ferry, Washington pored over intelligence reports with his most trusted advisors, Colonel Alexander Hamilton, barely 20 years old, but already proving his tactical brilliance. Spread maps across the rough wooden table, the situation was grimmer than even the most pessimistic assessments had suggested. British General Charles Cornwallis controlled much of New Jersey, and loyalist sentiment was rising as patriots began to lose faith in their cause. "The enemy believes we are finished," Washington murmured, his blue eyes studying the positions marked on the map. Perhaps that assumption will prove to be their undoing. The general's mind was already forming the audacious plan that would either save the revolution or destroy what remained of his army in one final, desperate gamble. The harsh reality was that without a decisive victory, the Continental Congress might be forced to seek terms with the British Crown. French support, which had been tentatively promised, would evaporate if the Americans could not demonstrate their ability to win battles. The cause of liberty itself hung by the thinnest of threads, and Washington knew that bold action was the only path forward. As snow began to fall outside, mixing with the frozen tears of a struggling nation, Washington made his decision. They would cross the Delaware on Christmas night, when the Hessians would least expect an attack. It was a plan born of desperation, but sometimes desperation breeds the kind of courage that changes the course of history. The general called for his subordinate commanders, knowing that the next few days would determine whether the United States of America would survive its infancy or perish before it could truly be born. The die was cast, and there would be no turning back from the perilous path ahead. Christmas Day 1776 dawned gray and bitter, with ice forming thick sheets along the Delaware's banks. As darkness fell, Washington's plan began to unfold with military precision that belied the desperate circumstances. Colonel John Glover's Marblehead fishermen, experienced in handling boats through treacherous waters, took command of the crossing operation. Their weathered hands gripped the oars of Durham boats and ferry vessels as the first groups of Continental soldiers began their perilous journey across the ice-choked river. The crossing was a nightmare of logistics and endurance. Horses slipped on the icy gangplanks, artillery pieces threatened to sink the overloaded boats, and men struggled to maintain their footing on decks slick with frozen spray. Captain Alexander Hamilton supervised the transport of the cannons, his mathematical mind calculating weight distributions and balance points, while his men worked with numb fingers to secure the precious artillery pieces that would prove crucial in the coming battle. According to historical accounts documented in the Pennsylvania Gazette of January 1777, the weather conditions were among the worst in memory, with driving sleet and snow that cut visibility to mere yards. Washington himself stood in the bow of one of the lead boats, his tall frame wrapped in a blue cloak, personally overseeing every aspect of the operation. The general understood that failure here would mean not just military defeat, but the complete dissolution of American resistance to British rule. By 3 a.m. on December 26th, the last of Washington's 2,400 men had reached the New Jersey shore. The army immediately began its 9-mile march to Trenton, moving into columns through the pre-dawn darkness. The northern column, led by General Nathanael Greene, included Washington himself and would attack from the north, while General John Sullivan's southern column would prevent any Hessian escape across Assunpink Creek. The soldiers marched through deepening snow, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Many left bloody footprints in their wake, their makeshift footwear no match for the harsh conditions. Yet there was something different in their bearing now, a sense of purpose that had been absent during the long retreat across New Jersey. They were no longer running from the enemy. They were moving toward a fight they desperately needed to win. As dawn approached, the outskirts of Trenton came into view through the swirling snow. The Hessian garrison, commanded by Colonel Johann Rall, remained unaware of the approaching Continental Army. Their sentries, numbed by cold and lulled by weeks of peaceful occupation, failed to detect the advancing Americans until it was far too late to mount an effective defense. Washington raised his hand, signaling the final approach to begin. The attack on Trenton began at 8 o'clock on the morning of December 26, 1776, with the thunderous roar of Captain Thomas Forrest's artillery echoing through the snow-covered streets. The Hessian garrison, many still recovering from Christmas celebrations, stumbled from their quarters in confusion as American cannons commanded by Captain Alexander Hamilton and Lieutenant James Monroe swept the main thoroughfares with devastating effect. Colonel Johann Rall, the Hessian commander, had dismissed repeated warnings about potential American attacks. His confidence in British superiority and contempt for colonial fighting ability proved fatal. As he struggled to organize a coherent defense, the Hessians, professional soldiers accustomed to European-style warfare, found themselves caught completely off guard by Washington's unconventional winter assault. Through what they had considered impassable conditions, General Nathanael Greene's northern column swept down King Street and Queen Street, driving the bewildered Hessians before them like leaves in a winter storm. The Continental soldiers, energized by their first taste of offensive action in months, pressed their advantage with fierce determination. Sergeant Joseph White of the 1st Pennsylvania Regiment later recalled how the men seemed transformed, their earlier despair replaced by a grim satisfaction as they finally struck back at their enemies. Meanwhile, General John Sullivan's Southern column had successfully sealed off the Assunpink Creek Bridge, trapping the Hessian garrison within the town. The coordination between the two American forces demonstrated a level of tactical sophistication that surprised even Washington's own officers. The months of retreat and hardship had forged his army into a more cohesive fighting force than anyone had realized. Colonel Rall, mounting his horse to rally his men, received a mortal wound that would claim his life later that day. His second-in-command, Major Friedrich von Dechow, also fell wounded, leaving the Hessian forces without effective leadership at the crucial moment. The professional soldiers who had seemed so formidable during the autumn campaigns now appeared confused and demoralized, their training proving inadequate for the chaotic street fighting that raged through Trenton's narrow lanes. Within 90 minutes, the Battle of Trenton was over. The Continental Army had achieved a complete victory, capturing nearly 1,000 Hessian prisoners while suffering only for wounded soldiers, 2 of whom had frozen to death during the march. The psychological impact of this triumph extended far beyond the tactical significance of capturing a single garrison town. As Washington surveyed the battlefield strewn with abandoned Hessian equipment and flags, he understood that something fundamental had changed. His army had remembered how to win, and more importantly, America had remembered how to hope. The general immediately began planning his next move, knowing that one victory, however complete, would not be enough to secure independence. The real test would come when British forces responded to this unexpected American success. The captured Hessian colors would soon fly as trophies in Philadelphia, visible symbols that the Continental Army remained a force to be reckoned with. News of the Trenton victory spread across the colonies with the speed of wildfire, reaching Philadelphia just 3 days later and igniting celebrations that had seemed impossible only a week before. The Continental Congress, which had been preparing for potential evacuation, suddenly found itself dealing with renewed enthusiasm for the war effort. Recruiting offices that had stood empty for months began filling with volunteers. Inspired by Washington's dramatic success, however, the commanding general understood that the psychological advantage gained at Trenton would quickly dissipate unless followed by additional victories. General Charles Cornwallis, one of Britain's most capable commanders, was already marching from New York with 8,000 troops to crush what he assumed was merely a temporary American resurgence. The British leadership, stung by their Hessian allies' humiliating defeat, was determined to end Washington's campaign once and for all. Washington faced an agonizing decision. His army's enlistments were still set to expire on December 31st, and many soldiers were eager to return home after their moment of triumph. The general called his officers together on December 30th and made an unprecedented appeal. Standing before his assembled commanders in the dim light of a Presbyterian church in Trenton, he asked them to convince their men to extend their service for just 6 more weeks. The response revealed the transformation that had occurred within the Continental Army. Soldiers who had endured months of defeat and hardship now stepped forward to pledge their continued service, inspired by their recent success and their commander's unwavering determination. Drummer boys beat the call to arms as regiment after regiment voted to remain with Washington, understanding that their struggle was far from over. By January 1st, 1777, Cornwallis had reached Princeton with his formidable force, confident that he would corner Washington's small army and end the rebellion. The British general had earned his reputation fighting in Europe and was considered one of the Crown's most reliable commanders. His plan was simple and effective: advance on Trenton, crush the Continental Army against the Delaware River, and capture Washington himself. The stage was now set for an even more crucial confrontation. Washington had approximately 5,000 men, including militia reinforcements that had arrived following news of the Trenton victory. Against them, Cornwallis commanded 8,000 well-equipped British and Hessian troops, supported by experienced officers and superior artillery. The numerical advantage clearly favored the Crown forces, but Washington had already demonstrated that conventional military wisdom could be overturned by audacity and superior tactics. As January 2nd dawned cold and clear, the two armies began maneuvering for what both sides understood would be the decisive engagement of the winter campaign. January 2nd, 1777 brought the sharp crack of musket fire to the frozen fields outside Trenton as advance units of Cornwallis's army clashed with American outposts. Washington had deployed his forces along the Sunpink Creek, using the natural barrier to anchor his defensive position, while buying precious time to finalize his most audacious plan yet. The British general, supremely confident in his numerical superiority, prepared for what he assumed would be a straightforward assault to crush the remnants of American resistance. The day-long battle along the creek saw repeated British attempts to force crossings, each repulsed by determined Continental troops who had found new confidence in their abilities. Captain Alexander Hamilton's artillery pieces, positioned to command the main bridge, turned back charge after charge with devastating effectiveness. The young officer's mathematical precision in calculating ranges and trajectories proved crucial, as British casualties mounted without achieving their objectives. As darkness fell, Cornwallis made a fateful decision that would haunt British military strategy for years to come. Believing Washington's army was trapped against the creek with nowhere to retreat, he chose to postpone his final assault until morning. While bagged the Old Fox at daylight, he reportedly told his officers, confident that the Continental Army would still be waiting for destruction when the sun rose. Washington, however, had no intention of fighting a conventional battle against superior numbers on ground of his enemy's choosing. Throughout the night of January 2nd, while British sentries watched the American campfires burning brightly across the creek, the Continental Army executed one of the most brilliant tactical withdrawals in military history, leaving skeleton crews to maintain the illusion of a full encampment. Washington marched his main force along back roads toward Princeton, where British reserves under Lieutenant Colonel Charles Mawhood lay vulnerable to surprise attack. The night march required extraordinary discipline and coordination. Artillery wheels were wrapped in cloth to muffle their sound, and strict silence was maintained as 5,000 men moved through the freezing darkness. General Hugh Mercer led the advance guard, his experience in frontier warfare proving invaluable as the army navigated unfamiliar terrain in conditions that would have challenged even experienced scouts. By dawn on January 3rd, Washington's army had covered 12 miles and was approaching Princeton from an unexpected direction. The British forces in the town, believing Cornwallis had Washington pinned at a Sunpink Creek, were completely unprepared for the assault that was about to engulf them. Once again, Washington had turned apparent defeat into potential victory through tactical brilliance and his army's growing confidence in their commander's strategic vision. The general deployment for battle, knowing that success at Princeton would establish the Continental Army as a force capable of defeating British regulars in open combat. Dawn on January 3rd, 1777 revealed frost-covered fields around Princeton, where Lieutenant Colonel Charles Mawhood's British forces were preparing for what they expected to be a routine march to reinforce Cornwallis at Trenton. Instead, they found themselves facing the advancing columns of Washington's Continental Army, appearing like specters from the morning mist in a maneuver that defied all conventional military expectations. The initial clash occurred near the Quaker meeting house on the outskirts of Princeton, where General Hugh Mercer's advance guard encountered Mahood's 17th Light Infantry Regiment. The engagement quickly escalated into fierce hand-to-hand combat, as both sides recognized the critical importance of the moment. Mercer, a veteran of European campaigns and a close friend of Washington, led his men with characteristic courage, until British bayonets brought him down, mortally wounded. The death of General Mercer threatened to break the American advance just as it had begun. His troops, many of them militia with limited combat experience, began to waver under the disciplined volleys of British regulars. For a crucial moment, the entire Princeton operation hung in the balance as American soldiers hesitated between advance and retreat, their confidence shaken by the loss of their beloved commander. It was at this critical juncture that Washington himself rode forward, his magnificent presence rallying the faltering troops. Spurring his horse to within 30 yards of the British line, the commanding general became a target for every enemy musket, yet somehow remained untouched as volleys crashed around him. His aide, Colonel John Fitzgerald, later admitted covering his eyes, certain that his commander would be struck down, only to open them and see Washington still mounted, still commanding, still inspiring his men to superhuman efforts. Captain Hamilton's artillery, arriving at the crucial moment, unlimbered their guns and began pouring devastating fire into the British ranks. The combination of Washington's personal leadership and Hamilton's tactical expertise proved decisive as the Continental troops found their courage and pressed forward with renewed determination. The British regulars, despite their training and discipline, began to give ground under the relentless American assault. Lieutenant Colonel Mahood, recognizing that his position had become untenable, ordered a fighting withdrawal toward Trenton, hoping to link up with Cornwallis's main force. However, Washington had anticipated this move and deployed additional forces to cut off the British retreat. The result was a running battle across the frozen countryside, with American forces harrying the British column every step of the way. By mid-morning, the Continental Army had achieved another complete victory, capturing valuable supplies and taking numerous prisoners while inflicting heavy casualties on crack British troops. More importantly, they had proven that American forces could defeat British regulars in conventional battlefield engagements, destroying the myth of British military invincibility that had paralyzed colonial resistance for months. The twin victories at Trenton and Princeton transformed the American Revolution from a dying rebellion into a viable struggle for independence that would ultimately attract crucial international support. Within weeks of the Princeton triumph, European observers who had dismissed the colonial cause as hopeless began reconsidering their assessments, particularly in France, where officials quietly began exploring ways to support British enemies. Without openly declaring war, General Cornwallis, arriving at Princeton to find only smoldering British equipment in abandoned positions, immediately recognized the strategic implications of Washington's brilliant campaign. His forces, which had seemed poised to crush the Continental Army, were now scattered across New Jersey, vulnerable to further American attacks. The British general ordered a general withdrawal to positions closer to New York, effectively ceding most of New Jersey to American control and providing the Continental Army with secure winter quarters in Morristown. The psychological impact of these victories extended far beyond military considerations. Throughout the colonies, patriots who had begun questioning the wisdom of resistance now found renewed determination to continue the struggle. Recruiting offices that had stood empty filled with volunteers, while financial contributions to the Continental Congress increased dramatically as wealthy merchants and planters regained confidence in American prospects for ultimate victory. Perhaps most significantly, the Princeton campaign demonstrated that George Washington possessed the strategic vision and tactical brilliance necessary to lead America to independence. His ability to transform seemingly hopeless situations into stunning victories through audacious planning and personal courage established his reputation as one of history's great military commanders. The general who had been criticized following the New York defeats was now hailed as the savior of American liberty. International recognition followed domestic enthusiasm. French Foreign Minister Charles Gravier, Comte de Vergennes, who had been reluctant to risk French resources supporting what appeared to be a losing cause, began serious negotiations with American representatives in Paris. The victories proved that the Continental Army could achieve decisive battlefield successes against professional European forces, making American independence seem achievable rather than merely hopeful. British strategic planning also underwent fundamental revision following Princeton. General William Howe, who had believed the rebellion would collapse following a few decisive defeats, now understood that he faced a protracted conflict requiring significantly more resources and different tactics. The comfortable assumption that colonial resistance would crumble when confronted by British military superiority had been shattered by Washington's winter campaign, as 1777 dawned with Continental forces securing their Morristown winter quarters. The American cause possessed something it had lacked since the Declaration of Independence: realistic hope for ultimate victory. The battles of Trenton and Princeton had not only saved the Continental Army from dissolution, but had transformed it into a force capable of defeating the world's most powerful military establishment. Washington's 10 crucial days had indeed given birth to a nation that would endure for centuries to come, proving that sometimes the darkest hour truly does precede the dawn of a new and glorious day.